Hello and welcome to my podcast, Whisper in the Shadows, the true story of a real-life undercover cop. I'm Michael Bates, and I was a police officer for 15 years in one of Australia's state police forces. I was also an undercover cop for over 2 years, and all the episodes of this podcast are my true stories of what it's really like to be an undercover cop. Rather, I was Michael Bates. So, full disclosure, Michael is not actually my real name. It was my covert identity I used on most of my operations. Everyone has a notion of what undercover policing is all about. Whether you think they're a narc, a covert operative, a dog, or a UC, most people seem to confuse plainclothes police with being undercover. There is a very big difference though. Most plainclothes police are detectives, and they don't wear a uniform so they aren't as obtrusive in public. Undercover is completely different. You become immersed in the world of your targets. And when you are a police officer, part of your role is to investigate crimes. This means you try and find evidence to prove the person you have arrested has committed that crime. This evidence can consist of physical, verbal, video, and witnesses. When you're an undercover police officer, though, you are the evidence. And you are the reason someone gets convicted of the crimes. That is both exciting and dangerous. So let's get on with the next episode. Episode 7, The Target, Part 3. In this episode, I'll be looking at one of my favourite targets, Buzz. Whilst Tommy was the gift that kept on giving, Buzz was, in general terms, an alright guy. I guess you could say I kind of liked him. Now, that never stopped me from doing my job, though. I think one of the hardest parts of being a UC is human nature. I learned it is very hard to pretend to like someone on an ongoing basis and have that familiarity with them. You had to sacrifice a part of yourself each time you met with these people. You had to stop being a human being in some sense. It is hard to articulate even now how I felt. In one sense, you were cold and calculating, knowing that by befriending them, making them open up, making them talk and thinking you were on their side, only to use all of that against them to have them arrested and very probably jailed. Then, on the other, you actually got to know them, and while some like Tommy were dead set pieces of shit, some you felt sorry for. They were in a situation because of a dependency they had. Part of me knew that didn't excuse them for breaking the law, but part of me also knew but there for the grace of God could have been me or you. You can't let it play too much on your mind or your psyche. You're there to do a job. You had to have a cynical and cold mindset. But I can also see how some people cross that line, as it isn't as easy to stay on for the mere reason that we are human. Okay, enough philosophical garbage. My man Buzz. So, Buzz was a white guy. He was probably in his late 50s or early 60s. He was portly, he had white hair, and he had a white beard. He didn't have a car that I knew of. I was constantly running him around in the time that I knew him. And there were at least 3 other operations he was linked into where the other UCs were doing the same. Yes, Buzz was that bad of a criminal that he was selling to 4 undercover cops. Now, I didn't realise this at first. We as a group may have socialised, but we kept our operations separate for obvious reasons. I'll come to how I became aware of the fact he was dealing with other operations a little bit later. Now, Buzz was operating in the eastern suburbs of the city. Not a big territory, but he was covering a fair amount and actually selling a fair amount as well. So, I get introduced to him and do an initial buy of $500, which cost me $300. All good. He says he's happy to sell me some more, gives me his mobile number, and that I should call him when I wanted to get on again. Now, it was a different buy because it was one of the ones where Danny didn't skim anything out of it. Maybe it was because he wasn't Vietnamese and didn't have a huge opinion of Danny. I'm not sure. But whatever it was, he gravitated to me and built up trust quickly. Or so I thought. Now, I'm calling Buzz maybe twice a week to get on. It was $1 buys because that is all he can deal with. My story is the same. I'm on the other side of town, I have a good customer base, but the gear on that side is pretty shit. I'm looking for better quality to be able to have a better product than what is being sold there now. I'm selling $100 packets and doing probably 2 grams a week if I cut it. So I'm making maybe $3 grand a week, allegedly. Buzz is a big talker. and he loves talking himself up. At one of my early buys, he tells me he has this guy he buys from who is a major dealer. He can get me more gear in larger amounts. Now that pricks my ears up because I thought that he was getting his gear from the Vietnamese in the area. Remember the fish and chip shop? This new entrant into the market, and by new I mean that we were unaware of, is great news. So I start to pump Buzz for more information about this guy. That must have been a bit too forthright for Buzz because he clammed up pretty quickly. He was like, "You're asking a lot of questions." I said, "Sorry mate, I didn't mean anything by it. Just interested because if you can hook me up and I can get more gear and expand." "I've never seen you use Mick. What's the go there?" he said. "Mate, we've been through this already, Buzz. I'm not going to use when I'm driving. I don't want to nod off and crash while I'm holding, do I?" He said. I could tell he wasn't convinced, so I spent the next 15 minutes trying to convince him that I didn't use. I sold. I smoked dope and I took some ease, but this was a money-making venture for me. In the end, I pulled the old, "Mate, if you don't feel comfortable, I'll take my money elsewhere and get the gear from the Vietnamese. It's all good. Let's not be hasty, it just seems a bit odd. I'll give you a call in a few days, okay?" "Yeah, sure," I said. "Am I dropping you home?" No, just take me here and drop me there. I have to meet someone." And I did. And when he got out of the car, he looked at me and shook his head. So I was driving back to my safe house with this feeling of dread. I thought I'd blown the op. If Buzz thought I was a cop, then he wouldn't introduce me and he wouldn't sell to me. We would be dead in the water. I had a debrief with my controller and we discussed what had happened. He wasn't too concerned and said to leave Buzz until he called me. Besides, there were some bit players we were looking at as well that we wanted to chase. One of these was a Vietnamese guy called Nguyen. Now, I only did 3 buys, I believe, from him. Obviously, I was introduced via Danny to him. So, Nguyen was this young guy. He would have been early to mid-20s. He drove one of those stereotypical Asian cars, a hatchback with a spoiler and a turbo that made that horrible sound every time he changed gears. There was one particular buy I remember making from him that would be just out of a movie about Asian drug dealers. Now, for some reason, Nguyen didn't like being in my car. The buys with him were not simple either. He was more like a runner than an actual dealer. Well, that was my thought process. I mean, he was dealing a lot of gear, but he was never holding. I'll do a little sideways here. Dealing drugs is not one size fits all. The idea of being out in public is an issue for drug dealing. People, and by people I mean police, can see what you are doing. So standing on a corner, taking money and handing over small packets of heroin was very 1980s. Dealers were getting smarter, or so they thought based off information their lawyers were giving them on how to avoid getting caught. Okay, so this might be speculation on my part, except for the fact that I have a great story about information that a defence lawyer gave their client on how they could beat an undercover police officer. But it did provide many unique ways of buying gear, especially from Vietnamese dealers, a la Tommy and his "I didn't sell heroin, I took money and got him heroin, but I didn't sell it to him." If it was hands off, for some reason, this meant they couldn't be tied to it and then not be charged with supplying or even worse, trafficking. I have heard of dealers collecting the money and then leaving the drugs in a place close by to be collected. There was one dealer who would make you go to a public phone box, call him, tell him you were there. Then you would have to find a particular cigarette brand packet, which was empty, in the garden close by. Once you put the money in that cigarette packet, you had to call the dealer back and he would tell you where the drugs were, which was a different brand cigarette packet about 50 metres away. And you had to go and find that cigarette packet with the drugs and then collect it. Now, it was usually just on the ground near some sort of item like a lamp post or a telegraph pole. And voila, you had your H and they had their money. Now, I believe they were watching the whole time, of course, and as far as I know, no one ever tried to rip them off. It wasn't easy to record those phone conversations, obviously, but with surveillance filming it all, that was pretty good evidence. Plus, you pull the phone records of getting a call from a payphone twice in 2 minutes at the exact location of the filming, and you're pretty much toast. So, needless to say, with the Vietnamese, with the exception of Lai, there was a lot of messing about. Which brings me back to this particular buy with Nguyen. I had given him a call and asked him if I could get on, wanting to buy 2 grams. We agreed to meet at a train station car park. I set off and had my trusty tape recorder set up and ready to go in my internal light cavity. As I've previously explained, this was an absolute gem of a place to hide it, and every word inside the car was recorded. Mind you, I was always remembering to turn the radio down very soft. It's funny that no one ever asked me why I had my radio off or on softly when they were in the car with me. We get out and stand around in my car. He asked me if I have the money, to which I replied, yes mate, of course. On the previous buy, he had had the gear with him, but it was only half a gram. So he says to me, we're going to have to go and get this gear. Why? I asked. Oh, look, just because I don't have it on me. Righto, I said. We can take my car. No, man, no, we're taking my car. Not that I don't trust you or anything, but we need to be in my car, he said to me. So alarm bells start to ring a little bit. Now, you are told, try and never get into a situation where you don't have an escape or where you don't have an advantage. There is always going to be a situation, though, where you have to go in someone's car, go into someone's house, or somewhere deserted to get the deal done. I just looked at him like, really? He just looked back with a look that said, up to you. If you want the drugs, we do it my way. So I grabbed my wallet and jumped in his car. Now, I was going through all the things that could go wrong. Firstly, I had $1,000 on me. He could be driving me somewhere to rob me, or taking me somewhere for someone else to rob me. He might want to interrogate me because Tommy had been spreading the police rumour and it had gotten to him. There were a number of options about what I could be in for there. And lastly, there was a possibility he, or his suppliers, had found out I was a UC and he was taking me to get killed. Now, the last was highly unlikely and was only a split-second thought process, but it did make me feel even more uncomfortable. And there is nothing worse than that feeling uncomfortable with a criminal next to you and trying to act calm and collected and not seeming stressed or worried for a prolonged period of time. Where are we going, mate? I asked. Not too far, just to get the gear, he said. Yeah, but where? I asked. Don't worry about it, mate. You'll know when we get there. Okay, so what have you been up to? I asked. This and that. Have been able to get onto some really good gear though, he said. Now, I was trying to concentrate on where we were going, as well as listen to the conversation and interact when I should. He was taking me south, towards the area I used to work before I became a UC, i.e. as a uniformed cop. This was even more unsettling for me. If we went to that area, what if I'd been to that house in uniform, or pulled the targets over? I tried not to show it, but I was really starting to stress. So when he said he had got onto a new supplier, my ears pricked up. Really, how good is it? I asked. Feeling a little bit calmer now, I had something else to focus on. Oh, you know when you get that chemical taste on the gums when you rub it to see what it's like? He said. Yeah, I replied, not being 100% sure what he was talking about. I thought you only did that with cocaine, but apparently not. Either I was learning something new, or I was being tested. Well, this stuff is so good, that chemical taste, it just lasts. It tastes like you're in a hospital, he said. So that means it's pretty pure then? I asked him, trying to not sound too dumb. Very pure, man. You're going to love it, he replied, looking over at me with a big smile on his face and clapping me on the shoulder. It was only a small thing, but it immediately put my nerves at ease. He was just going to sell me the gear to make his money. Nothing more sinister in that. We'd also taken a turn that meant we were heading away from my old stomping ground as a uniformed copper, which further eased my stress, but not my level of observation. So we come to this shopping centre, and not like a Westfields mall or anything like that, but more like a shopping strip. By that I mean there was a grocery store, a fruit shop, a news agency, a fish and chip takeaway, a real estate agency, and some other odds and sods shops. And this big open car park just off the main road. This shopping centre would later, I think maybe the following year or two, become infamous for a number of Asian gang-related incidents, including shootings, stabbings, and a murder. We pull into the car park and he asked me for the money. Nah, mate, I said, you get me the gear first. Not how it works, man. You need to give me the money and I'll go get the gear for you. My person wants to see you and make sure you're okay before I can sell more weight to you, he said. I had a choice to make. Do I give him the money and he could do a runner, or do I trust him? I was, after all, in his car. He had to come back for that, I surmised. Fine, but next time, none of this cloak and dagger shit, okay? I said. It'll be cool, man, don't worry, he replied. And with that, I gave him a wad of cash, being $1,000 made up of $20 and $50 notes, all of which had their serial numbers recorded and had been photocopied. Nguyen gets out of the car and takes off towards the shops, saying, wait here. We were parked facing the road, which meant that to see where he was going, I had to turn around, which even then didn't give me a clear view. As we had driven to park, we had driven past the front of the shops, around the car park, the long way to where we ended up parking. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but when Nguyen got out and went off, I understood why. I didn't get to see where he actually went to get the gear. I assumed it was one of the shops. I don't think he went in the front of any of them, so I guessed he must have gone around the back. He wasn't gone very long, maybe 5 minutes. I could see him in the rearview mirror sauntering back to his car with his sunglasses on and a smile on his face, like he didn't have a care in the world. He gets in and says, miss me? Sure, why not? I said. How'd it go? Did you get me the gear? At that, he produces a small, wrapped alfoil package, which he slightly pulls apart to reveal a whitish coloured rock. I like the look of that, I said. He wrapped it back up and gave it to me. There you go, man, he said. So, where'd you get it? I asked, hoping he might slip up and tell me. If I told you that, then you wouldn't need to buy it through me, would you? Was his reply. We drove off and he took me back to my car. I agreed to call him in the week coming to get some more gear off him and to let him know how this gear went. The operation closed down a few weeks later and he was raided. And they found heroin, some money, and he was charged with supplying and possession of a dangerous drug. I don't know what happened after that, except I was called to court a number of years later as I was preparing to leave the police to give evidence in a trial. Remember the brother and sister I spoke about earlier who had a shop? Well, I believe that is who Nguyen had gotten his gear from that day, but I never got to actually find out. Whilst these buys with Nguyen were going on, I still had Buzz there. I had done one or more buy with him after that time where I thought he was getting suspicious on me. We did the buy in a cemetery of all places. I picked him up on the side of the road and he took me there. The buy was pretty straightforward and again captured on my tape recorder. This one went a bit different though. Once we finish, Buzz pulls out his kit and asks me if I mind if he shoots up. Now, I was a little shocked. I hadn't actually had anyone shoot up in front of me before. It wasn't going to be the last time either. I prefer it if you didn't. Can't you wait till you get home? What if we get caught? I'm holding, Buzz. Don't worry. Cops never come in here during the day, he said. Do you want to hit? That was obviously a test. Buzz, mate, what have I told you? I'm not going to have a hit when I'm holding and having to drive home. I am not stupid and I don't want to get caught. Besides, you know I only smoke it. I've told you this before. Yeah, he said. And with that, he takes off his shoes and proceeds to shoot up between his toes. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen anyone who has had a hit of heroin, but after the initial euphoria of the drug, they become sleepy, or go the nod, as it's commonly referred to. Heroin is an opioid, which is a depressant drug. It slows down certain functions of a person's brain and nervous system. Heroin is a drug that comes from the opium poppy and is in the class of drugs called depressants because, as I said, it slows down the brain and the central nervous system. What heroin does to you depends on how much you take, how often you've been using heroin. The longer you use it, the more you may build up a tolerance to the effects. When you last took heroin, how pure it is, etc., etc. Now, the effects are generally a rush, which is a strong increase in euphoric feelings and feelings of being warm and flushed during that rush, heavy sensation in the extremities, reduced sensation of pain, drowsiness, sedation, and finally lethargy. So those last couple of parts is what we call people going the nod. Okay, back to Buzz. He was a regular user and his reasoning for shooting up in his toes was so you couldn't see the track marks. I think it might be because his veins were collapsing in his arms, but that's another story. Junkies will go to great lengths to hide their addictions. And the more often you use, the more you need to use to get that rush. I had a future target who had used so much that he had to shoot into his calves, almost literally upside down. So, Buzz is going the nod in my car. "Buzz, mate," I'm yelling out. He starts drifting in and out and mumbling nonsense or unintelligibly. He's slumped in the back of my car and I am starting to freak out. What if he overdoses? What if he doesn't wake up? Am I an accomplice? With Buzz on the nod, I get out of the car and walk a little bit away, all the while keeping an eye on it. I get out my phone and call my controller, telling him what was going on. Thankfully, he calmed me down and told me to rouse him, take him back to where he lived and get him out of the car. He also said if he did start to get worse, or God forbid stop breathing, then take him to a hospital. I get back in the car and rouse Buzz. He starts to come out of it as it had been about 20 minutes since he's hit. He looks at me and says, "Sorry, Mick." Yeah, forget it, Buzz, I said. "Just don't do that again, okay?" "Oh, it's not like you're a cop, Mick, and you will get into trouble if I OD," he said. Buzz was testing me again, and it wouldn't be the last time. A few weeks later, I get a phone call one afternoon. It was Buzz. He sounded agitated and he wanted me to come and pick him up. Now, remember earlier when I mentioned that Buzz was not the luckiest criminal mastermind in the world, nor was he the smartest? Well, he wasn't only the target of my operation, but at least 2 other covert operations. Yes, that's right, he was selling heroin to 3 or 4 undercovers at the same time. On this day though, one of those operations had been closing and he'd been raided, arrested, interviewed and charged. Of course, I knew this was happening, finally, and was asked to keep an ear out for anything that he might or anyone else might be saying. I didn't have to wait long. Buzz was still at the police station when he called me. He wanted me to come and pick him up from out in front and take him home. "Yeah, Buzz, sure, where are you?" "Okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. That was a fun phone conversation to record, but it got better. I turn up and Buzz is standing out the front in a tracksuit and thongs. I pull up and he gets in the front passenger seat. "Buzz, what's going on?" I ask. "Just drive, Mick, let's go," he said. "What's happened?" I asked. "Mate, I got raided this morning. I was selling to an undercover cop," he said. I replied, "You what? And you called me to come and get you from the station? Are you fucking crazy? What did you tell them about me? Is this a setup?" "No, Mick, no, I didn't tell them anything about you, okay? Just drive, turn right here," he said. "What's up here, Buzz?" I asked. I knew it wasn't where he lived. That was the other way to where he asked me to turn. "I just need somewhere quiet to talk to you, Mick, okay?" he asked me. "Yeah, all right, sure," I replied. So I follow his directions and we end up parking in a quiet street in the next suburb over from the police station and about 3 suburbs from where Buzz lives. Now, before I pick Buzz up, I have obviously switched on my recording device to record this conversation because I knew it was going to be a beauty. Buzz starts to tell me about the undercover cop he was selling to, describes him, and then asks me if I know him. Of course, I say no, and I have no idea what he's talking about. "Good," he says. "Mick, I'm going to ask you a question, all right? So don't get upset. Are you an undercover cop?" "Do I look like a cop, Buzz? I mean, really, of course I'm not. Are you fucking serious?" I replied. "Oh, sorry, Mick, I had to ask," he starts. My lawyer told me that if I ask you if you're a cop and you say no, but you are, then anything I say to you or anything I have done can't be used as evidence." With my most stunned response I could muster, "Wow, really, Buzz? Is that true?" "No, I'm not, of course. But is that really true? Can I use that too?" He then said to me, "That's what my lawyer told me, and yeah, I would ask everyone before you deal with them. I knew you weren't, Mick, but I just had to ask you." "Yeah, Buzz, no hard feelings. It's all good, mate," I tell him. "So what did you tell the coppers?" "Nothing much, and I didn't tell them about you," he said. "Did you tell them about your supplier?" I asked. "No, mate, I wouldn't give him up," he said. I had been trying to find a way to get further up the chain with Buzz for weeks. He went through stages of trusting me and then being paranoid I was a copper. So coming out and asking him for no reason was going to make him really suspicious. Now though, I had a golden opportunity and I wasn't going to let it slip. That's where we'll leave this episode of Whisper in the Shadows. Next episode, you'll discover whether, in fact, Buzz does introduce me to his supplier. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so when the new episode drops, you'll get notified straight away. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to Whisper in the Shadows, True Stories of a Real-Life Undercover Cop. I hope you have enjoyed that episode. In the next episode, we'll explore another exciting operation. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Lastly, if you're an ex-covert operative or undercover police officer and would like to chat about your experiences or tell your stories on my podcast, then please get in contact by my email, which is on this page.